The dog found her before anyone else did. Not because she was loud. She was not. She had learned somewhere in the month since the fire to take up as little space as possible. Fold yourself small enough, and the world stops noticing you exist. It is a survival skill, and it costs something every time you use it. The dog noticed. He was a German shepherd named Colt, and he had spent 6 years learning to notice the things people tried to hide. He stood at the end of the bus station bench with his ears forward and his dark eyes fixed on the woman, sleeping beneath a gray wool blanket that had seen better decades. His handler, Gunnery Sergeant Deacon Pruitt, held the leash and watched the dog and waited. Colt did not growl. He did not bark or pull. He simply stood there with a kind of deliberate stillness that Deacon had come to understand, over years of working alongside him, as something close to recognition. Deacon looked at the woman. Late 40s, maybe. Brown hair shot through with premature gray, matted against the armrest of the bench where her head rested. Heavy coat, too big for her frame, with the collar pulled up. One boot unlaced. Her hands were curled against her chest, and when the coat shifted as she breathed, Deacon saw it. On her left forearm, faded blue-green ink on pale skin, an eagle, a globe, an anchor. He stopped breathing for a second. If this story finds you when you need it most, take a moment and subscribe. Turn on the bell and stay close, because this one matters. Deacon Pruitt was 39 years old, 6 feet and 2 inches of him, built like a man who had spent 15 years doing things that required not being soft. His hair was cut high and tight, dark brown going gray at the temples, and his face carried the kind of stillness you earn from spending too many hours in too many places where stillness kept you alive. He had a jaw that looked like it had been quarried rather than grown, and a scar that ran along the right side of his neck from a piece of vehicle debris in a country he did not talk about anymore. His eyes were the particular gray-green of deep river water, and they moved the way water does, always checking the current. He had been passing through Mill Haven, Oregon, on a gray Tuesday in February because he was always passing through somewhere. That was the shape his life had taken after he separated from the Corps 18 months earlier. He took contract work when it came, declined it when it did not, and kept driving. Colt rode in the back of the truck on a padded platform Deacon had built himself, and together they covered ground. And that was enough, until it wasn't. He crouched down beside the bench, not too close. He had learned from Colt that giving a person space was often the first kindness you could offer. "Hey," he said quietly. The woman's eyes opened. They were brown, and they were sharp, and they went wide for exactly 1 second before they settled into something practiced and guarded. She had woken up in enough uncertain situations to have a protocol for it. "Not looking for trouble," Deacon said. He nodded toward her arm. "Saw the ink?" She looked down at her forearm, then back at him. Her jaw shifted. "What branch?" "Marine Corps." "You?" A pause. "Marine Corps." Colt sat down beside Deacon's right knee, ears still forward, tail moving once. The woman looked at the dog, and something in her face changed. Just slightly. The way a door shifts in a frame when the temperature drops. "His name's Colt," Deacon said. She did not answer that. She did not look away from the dog either. Deacon straightened up. He did not offer a hand yet. "There's a diner 2 blocks west. Nora's. They're open. You want coffee? I'm buying." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he thought she would say no. "Just coffee," she said finally. "Just coffee," he agreed. Her name was Sandra Kowalczyk, and she told him that much at the diner and not much more. She told him she had grown up in Central Oregon that she had served 2 tours as a motor transport operator before a knee injury ended it, and that she had been living in a rental house in Millhaven for 3 years before the fire in November took it and everything in it. She said all of this the way a person recites facts about someone they used to know. Flat, careful, organized. Sandra Kowalczyk was 46 years old. She was 5'5", compact and athletic despite the months of rough living, with the posture of someone trained to hold her spine straight even when everything else was folding. Her face was angular and expressive in a way she had not fully learned to suppress. She had brown eyes that moved quickly and hands that were rough from work she had done in her life and kept doing because that was what you did. There was a bruise along her left collarbone, old and yellowing. She did not mention it. He did not ask. Nora's diner was warm in the way that old places are warm, the kind of warmth that has soaked into the wood over decades and does not leave. A woman named Dolores, who Deacon guessed was in her mid-60s, brought coffee without being asked and set a plate of toast down between them with a look that said she had seen hard mornings before and would not comment on this one. Colt lay under the table, pressed against Deacon's boot. The fire was electrical, Sandra said. Landlord's wiring. Inspector confirmed it. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Landlord's been fighting the insurance payout for 3 months. Says I left something running. I didn't. You have documentation? I had documentation. She looked out the window. A lot of things were in that house. The coffee was good. The diner was mostly empty. February, in a small Oregon town, has a particular kind of quiet to it, gray and honest, and it settled around them while Deacon thought about what to say and what not to say. Where are you staying? He asked. Bus station's covered, she said, and quiet after midnight. She said it without complaint or apology, which was the most Marine thing about it. Deacon sat with that for a moment. Then he said, I know a woman. Runs a property management company on the other side of town. Name's Harriet Voss. She's helped veterans with housing situations before. You want? I can make a call. Sandra looked at him directly. I don't know you? You don't, he agreed. Why would you make that call? He nodded toward her arm and the faded eagle, globe, and anchor. Because we're the same kind of people, he said. And because my dog sat down next to you, and Colt doesn't sit down next to people he doesn't trust. Sandra looked down at Colt. The dog had not moved, but his ears were angled toward her now, and his eyes were soft. The door of the diner opened, letting in a gust of cold February air and a man in a clean, dark overcoat. He was about 50, with the kind of careful grooming that announced effort and money equally. He had a broad, practiced smile, and the eyes of someone doing math behind it. He scanned the room with a smooth efficiency that reminded Deacon of people who spent a lot of time figuring out what they could get from a room before they decided whether to stay in it. Colt's head lifted. His ears went forward, and the low shift in his body was subtle enough that you would miss it if you did not know what to look for. Deacon knew what to look for. The man spotted Sandra, and the practiced smile deepened. He walked to their table as if he had been invited. Miss Kowalczyk. He pulled out a chair without being asked and sat down. I was hoping to find you. The city shelter told me you'd been coming here mornings. Sandra's hands around her mug went still. This is a private conversation, Deacon said quietly. The man's smile swung toward him, smooth as oil on water. Of course, I apologize for the interruption. I'm Dale Forrest, representing Compass Ridge Property Group. We manage the unit that experienced the unfortunate incident in November. He produced a card from his inside pocket and set it on the table. I wanted to speak with Ms. Kowalczyk about the status of the insurance review. She has counsel, Deacon said. He did not know if that was true. He said it because it was the right thing to say, and because Dale Forrest had sat down without being asked, and because Colt was doing the thing where his breathing got very controlled and deliberate. Forrest's smile held. That's wonderful to hear. We simply want to ensure this is resolved fairly and quickly for everyone involved. He said a few more things in the same register, all smooth reassurance and careful phrasing that could be read back later without landing on anything specific. And then he stood, touched the card on the table with 2 fingers, and left the same way he had come. Easy, unhurried. Sandra had not said a word. You don't have counsel, Deacon said. No. You do now, he said. Or you will. Eat the toast. Then we're going to Harriet Voss's office. Now the problem, as it turned out, was not simple. Harriet was 62, a trim, compact woman with close-cropped silver hair and her reading glasses that she wore, pushed up on her forehead when she was not using them and perched on her nose when she was angry. She ran her property management company from a cluttered office above a hardware store, and she had a voice that could have cut glass if she chose to sharpen it. She listened to Sandra's situation with her glasses on her nose, which told Deacon everything. Compass Ridge, she said flatly when Sandra finished. Dale. You know him, Deacon said. Every housing advocate in this county knows Dale. She pulled a folder from a drawer with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting to pull it. He represents Compass Ridge, which is technically a property management company and functionally a way for a man named Gerald Hatch to acquire distressed properties and collect rents on housing that does not meet code. She opened the folder on her desk. The fire inspector's report from the Kowalczyk property is public record. I have a copy. It confirms faulty knob and tube wiring, which the landlord was notified about 18 months ago and did not repair. Sandra looked at the folder. They told me they couldn't find the notification. Someone filed it with the city and someone at the city logged it, Harriet said. Whether anyone told Hatch's company is a question worth asking out loud. She looked up. You said you had documentation, the inspector's report, maintenance requests. On my laptop, Sandra said. In the house. The laptop didn't survive. No. Harry took her glasses off and set them on the desk. She was quiet for a moment with the look of someone doing math that they do not like the result of. What about your unit? Who was your renter's insurance through? I didn't have it, Sandra said. The words cost her. You could hear it. Harriet nodded slowly. All right. Here's what we have and what we don't. The fire inspector's report establishes the cause and confirms the wiring deficiency. That exists and it's public. What we don't have right now is the paper trail showing Compass Ridge was notified of the deficiency and failed to act. That file exists somewhere, either with the city or with a contractor they called and dismissed, or in Compass Ridge's own records. They'd have reason to make it disappear, Deacon said. They would, Harriet said. And given that Forrest showed up at the diner this morning to speak to her without her being represented, I'd say they already know the report is a problem for them. Colt had been lying against the baseboard near the office door. He shifted and exhaled, which was his version of saying he had heard enough and agreed with the assessment. What do we do? Sandra asked. Harriet put her glasses back on her nose. First, you're not sleeping in that bus station tonight. I have a unit that's between tenants. You're staying there until we sort this out. She said it without making it sound like charity, which was its own kind of skill. Second, we call an attorney. I know someone at the Veterans Legal Aid Clinic in Grants Pass who handles exactly this. Third, we go find the paper trail Compass Ridge would rather not have found. There was a board on Harriet's office wall covered in pushpins and index cards, and by the time Deacon understood what it was, he had stopped being surprised. Harriet had been tracking Compass Ridge and Dale for 14 months. 3 other tenants, 2 other fires, both listed as electrical, both resulting in displaced renters who had walked away because they did not have the resources to fight. 1 property condemned. 2 properties subsequently bought at a deep discount through a holding company that shared a registered agent with Compass Ridge. They do the same thing every time, Harriet said. Neglect the property until a problem creates a crisis. Dispute responsibility. Delay the insurance claim until the tenant runs out of money or patience or both. Acquire the property at a reduced price through a connected buyer when the original owner can't carry the liability anymore. The original owner of Sandra's unit, Deacon said. Older couple, Harold and May Tillman. They've owned that rental for 22 years. Harold's 74. May had a stroke in September. Harriet's voice stayed level. Compass Ridge was managing the property on their behalf. The Tillmans signed a management agreement in good faith. Right now, they're looking at a liability claim from their own insurer, and they don't fully understand why. Sandra had gone very still. They didn't know, she said. About the wiring? I believe they didn't. About what Forest Group is doing to their liability exposure? I'm quite sure they don't. Deacon leaned back in his chair. He thought about Harold Tillman, a man he had never met, 74 years old, with a sick wife and a management company he had trusted to protect what he had spent a working life building. He thought about how that kind of trust gets arranged and then used. He thought about how Forrest had smiled in the diner that morning, easy and practiced. We need to talk to the Tillmans, he said. I was going to say the same thing, said Harriet. Harold Tillman lived in a tidy single-story house on the eastern edge of Millhaven, where the town gave way to scrub oak, and the view opened up toward the hills. He came to the door in a flannel shirt and reading glasses, and looked at Deacon and Harriet and Sandra on his porch with the careful eyes of a man who had been through a hard several months and was not sure what kind of news fit through this particular doorway. He was 74, slightly under 6 feet, with the stooped posture of a tall man who had spent a lifetime bending to the work. His hair had gone entirely white, and his hands were the hands of a man who had spent 40 years as a general contractor, thick-fingered and permanently scored with the traces of that work. His face was kind in the specific way of people who have earned it, with deep lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun and wind. He looked at Sandra. You're the young woman, he said. From the fire. Yes, sir, Sandra said. He opened the door wider. May Tillman was in the living room in a recliner chair, a small woman of 71 with a knit blanket over her lap, and the careful stillness of someone still relearning how her body worked after the stroke. She had light eyes and thin white hair, and she watched them come in with the steady attention of a person for whom watching had become more available than moving. When Colt came through the door with Deacon, she made a small sound that was not a word, and the dog walked to her without being told. He put his chin on the arm of the chair beside her hand, and she rested her fingers on the side of his broad head, and for a moment the room was very quiet. Harold sat down across from his wife and looked at his dog-warmed wife and then at the people who had come to his door. Tell me what you know, he said. They told him. It took a while. Harriet laid it out carefully, factually, without drama. The way you tell an older person bad news when you want them to understand it rather than feel it first. Harold listened with his hands folded in his lap, and twice he pressed them together hard enough that the knuckles went pale, And once he looked at the ceiling and breathed through his nose. When it was done, he sat in the quiet for a moment. I signed that management agreement because my brother-in-law said Compass Ridge was reliable, he said. 3 years ago, May's health was starting to go, and I thought it would take something off my plate. His voice was steady. Something behind it was not. I thought I was being smart. You were making a reasonable decision, Harriet said. What they did with the access it gave them is not on you. The notification, Harold said. About the wiring. Did it come to me? City records show it was filed with the managing agent. Compass Ridge. They never told me. We believe that's accurate. Harold was quiet again. Then he said, Where's the file? The one showing they were notified. That's what we're trying to find, Deacon said. City clerk's office should have a copy of the original filing. But Compass Ridge will have received a copy, too, and we believe they've removed it from the documents they've been submitting to the insurer. Can they be made to produce it? With the right legal pressure, Harriet said. That's why we're here. We need to know if you're willing to cooperate, because what happened to Sandra is part of a pattern, and closing that pattern down requires making it visible. It requires you to be willing to say, publicly and formally, that you were not notified. Harold looked at May. May was still resting her hand on Colt's head. She looked back at her husband with eyes that did not require more explanation. Tell me what to sign, Harold said. The city clerk's office was a beige room with fluorescent lighting and filing cabinets that went back to the early 90s. The clerk on duty was a man in his 40s named Terrence Beale, who had the mild, focused look of someone who had spent many years caring about things the world undervalued, which is to say he cared about records and took them seriously. And when Deacon and Harriet came in with a formal request for the archived notification file associated with the Tillman property address, he went to look for it without argument. He came back 20 minutes later. It's here, he said. And he set a copied document on the counter, and he looked at them with a slight lift of the chin that said he knew what a document like this was worth. The notification was dated 19 months ago. Compass Ridge Property Management was listed as the receiving agent. A contact name at Compass Ridge appeared at the bottom, along with a date stamp confirming receipt. Dale's name was not on it. The name on it was an employee of Compass Ridge, and that was enough. Harriet photographed every page. Deacon photographed every page. They thanked Terrence Beale, who nodded and said nothing, and filed the document again, with the particular satisfaction of a man who had once been asked to make something disappear and had quietly declined. Sandra's attorney was a woman named June Park, 41, with close-cropped dark hair and the kind of focused, unhurried manner that comes from spending years taking cases that mattered and winning them patiently. She drove from Grants Pass in a gray sedan and sat with Sandra for 2 hours at Harriet's kitchen table, while Deacon and Colt sat in the living room, and Deacon stared at the ceiling. He had not meant to stay in Millhaven this long. He was aware of that. He had been passing through. He had been 2 days out from the coast, and he had stopped for gas, and Colt had needed to stretch, and then the bus station, and then the tattoo on the forearm, and now here he was in Harriet's living room on a Wednesday evening, with a legal action being assembled in the kitchen, and a German shepherd asleep on the rug, and no particular pull toward anywhere else. He looked at Colt. Colt was doing the thing where he slept, but one ear stayed up. He had always done that, ready without being tense, trusting, but not naive. Deacon had tried, in his 2 years with Colt, since the dog completed his service and was retired into Deacon's custody, to learn from that. He had mostly failed. He kept watching. June Park emerged from the kitchen at 8 in the evening with papers and a look of precise satisfaction. We're filing a formal bad faith insurance claim against Compass Ridge's insurer and a negligence action naming Compass Ridge Property Management and Gerald Hatch personally, she said. The city notification document plus Harold's statement creates a solid foundation. I've also drafted a referral to the Oregon Division of Financial Regulation regarding the pattern of behavior across the 3 properties. She paused. Dale will have this in his inbox by Friday morning. Sandra stood in the kitchen doorway with her hands in her coat pockets and an expression that was doing several things at once, none of them simple. Will it work? She asked. Will it succeed? Yes, June said. On what timeline, I can't promise. But Compass Ridge cannot argue around a city notification document, Harold's testimony, and 2 other displaced tenants who, once I contact them, may choose to be part of this. She looked at Harriet. You have contact information for the other tenants? I'll send it tonight, Harriet said. Deacon drove Sandra to the temporary unit Harriet had arranged, a small, clean second-floor apartment above a laundromat with good heat, and a window that looked out over the main road. He carried the few things she had from the bus station locker where she had been keeping them. A backpack, a small bag. At the door, she said, You were just passing through? I was, he agreed. Why'd you stop? He thought about that. Colt sat down. She looked at the dog who was sitting at Deacon's left heel with his tail moving steadily. Then she looked at Deacon. You can't fix all of it, she said, even if this goes right. I lost things in that fire that don't come back. I know, he said. My grandmother's letters. She wrote to my grandfather every week for 42 years. I had all of them. She said it without breaking, which meant she had said it enough times alone that the words had worn smooth. I had photographs, my discharge papers, things. I know, he said again. So why does it feel like something might be different now? He didn't answer right away. He thought about Harold pressing his hands together, with the knuckles gone white, and then asking where to sign. He thought about Terrence, setting the document on the counter with that quiet lift of his chin. He thought about Harriet's board of pushpins and the specific kind of refusal it represented. Because it might be, he said. She nodded once. She unlocked the door. Thank you, she said. Get some sleep, he said. Real sleep. He and Colt walked back to the truck in the cold. By the end of the week, June had reached both of the other displaced tenants. One of them, a 63-year-old retired nurse named Patricia Dean, had saved everything and had been waiting for exactly this. She called Harriet on Friday afternoon and she cried on the phone, and when she was done crying, she said she was ready to do whatever needed to be done. The second tenant, a man in his 50s named Frank Abner, who had been staying with his daughter since November, came to Harriet's office on Saturday with a folder of documents and a look of compressed anger that had been compressed for too long. They sent someone to see me, he said. Month after the fire. Said I might be liable for an electrical problem in the unit. Said I might want to think about whether I could afford a legal fight. He set the folder on Harriet's desk. I kept every piece of paper they ever sent me and a record of every call. Harriet opened the folder. She let out a breath through her nose that was not quite a sound. Frank, she said carefully, did you know you have a copy of a Compass Ridge internal maintenance memo from 14 months ago? He blinked. I don't know what I have. They sent me things. I kept them, that's all. Harriet photographed the memo and sent it to June within the hour. The memo was a 7-line internal note from a Compass Ridge maintenance supervisor noting that the electrical condition at 3 properties, including the one Sandra had lived in, required licensed contractor assessment and quoting projected repair costs. At the bottom of the memo, in a different hand, were 2 words: hold off. The handwriting matched Dale's signature on documents Harriet had collected. June received it, called Harriet, and said one sentence: "This case just became significantly easier." Things moved after that with the particular momentum of a river after the ice breaks. June filed the bad faith claim on Tuesday. She filed the referral to the Division of Financial Regulation on the same day. On Thursday, a reporter from the Grants Pass Tribune named Alicia Meadows, who had been covering housing issues in Southern Oregon for 4 years, called Harriet after being tipped by someone at the Division of Financial Regulation, who had seen the referral and decided the timing was right. Harriet called Deacon that evening. "A reporter wants to talk to Sandra," she said. "I want to make sure Sandra's ready." Deacon relayed the message. Sandra sat on the edge of the couch in the laundromat apartment with her hands around a cup of tea and was quiet for a long moment. "Will it help?" she said. "Harriet thinks so. Public record of the pattern makes it harder for Hatch to settle quietly and try again somewhere else." Sandra looked at her hands, at the faded tattoo on her forearm. She had served 2 tours in the kind of conditions that required a person to assess risk honestly, without the luxury of wishful thinking, and she brought that habit here. "Okay," she said. "Yes." She spoke to Alicia Meadows for an hour the next afternoon. She was precise and steady, and did not overstate anything. She talked about the fire and what she lost and how many weeks she had spent in that bus station. And she said it all in the same tone she might have used to describe a road march, which was the only way she knew how to talk about hard things. Harold agreed to be interviewed the same day. He sat in his living room with May beside him, and he said that he had trusted a management company with the property that was supposed to carry him and his wife through their later years, and that what they had done with that trust was not something he had words for that were appropriate for print. Alicia had words. They ran in the Tribune the following Tuesday under a headline that asked a plain question about who was protecting Oregon renters when the people managing their housing were not. Dale did not comment for the article. Compass Ridge Property Management's legal representation issued a statement describing the allegations as without merit and the documentation as mischaracterized. Gerald's name did not appear in the statement. By the following Monday, Compass Ridge's insurer had requested an internal audit of the 3 claims. 2 days after that, a representative from the insurer contacted June to discuss a preliminary resolution framework. June listened to the framework and told the representative what she would require to begin that conversation. And the representative said they would call back. They called back the next morning. Deacon had been staying at a motel on the north end of Millhaven that had a ground-floor room with a door that opened onto the parking lot, which was useful for the dog. He had told himself every few days that he would leave soon. There were contract opportunities in Portland. There was no reason to be anchored here. He kept not leaving. He had started eating breakfast at Nora's diner regularly enough that Dolores brought his coffee before he sat down. He had helped Harold, who turned out to be incapable of sitting still while a legal process ground forward, replace a section of fascia board on the rental property that had been damaged in the aftermath of the fire investigation. 2 mornings. They worked mostly without talking, which suited them both. Harold handled tools with the automatic ease of 4 decades of contracting, and at one point he handed Deacon a pry bar and did not explain how to use it, which was its own kind of respect. On the 3rd morning, Harold brought a thermos of coffee and they sat on the front steps, and Harold said, "You got family?" "My dad," Deacon said. "He's in Klamath Falls. We talk." What's keeping you here? Deacon looked at Colt, who was sitting at the base of the porch steps, watching a crow that had landed in the driveway. Unfinished business, he said. Harold was quiet for a moment with his coffee. You were a Marine. You got training, skills. What were you thinking of doing next? I haven't decided. Harold nodded slowly. When I was 42, I thought about selling the contracting business and doing something else. Spent 6 months not deciding. Then a job came in, and I picked up the hammer, and that settled it. He looked down at the repair work they had done. Sometimes the answer's where you already are. Deacon did not say anything. He looked at the crow and the dog watching the crow and the tidy, weather-beaten street of Millhaven in February, gray and cold and honest. The preliminary settlement came through on a Thursday afternoon. June called Sandra directly, and Sandra called Deacon, and her voice on the phone had a quality he had not heard in it before, which was not relief exactly, but was something adjacent to it, something that had been under pressure for a long time and was beginning, carefully, to ease. The settlement covered Sandra's displacement costs, the value of documented lost property, and a separate amount that June had negotiated for the harm of what Compass Ridge had done to extend the situation. It was not everything. It could not return the letters her grandmother had written to her grandfather for 42 years. It could not return the photographs. It was real, and it was more than nothing, and it arrived through the proper channels that such things were meant to arrive through. Compass Ridge Property Management, as part of the settlement, would be subject to a compliance audit by the Division of Financial Regulation. Gerald retained separate counsel. Dale resigned his position with Compass Ridge the following week for reasons his representative described as personal. Harold and May Tillman's liability exposure was resolved through a separate filing that documented the management company's failure to inform them of the notification. Their property was transferred back to their direct management. Harold called Harriet when it was confirmed and said, "Good, good," twice, which was a lot for Harold. And Harriet said she could hear May in the background saying something that sounded like relief. Patricia Dean received her own settlement. Frank Abner received his. He drove to Harriet's office to sign the final paperwork and shook her hand and then shook Deacon's hand, though Deacon had been in the room largely by coincidence and said, "They told me I couldn't afford a legal fight. I want you to know I couldn't afford a legal fight." Harriet looked at him. But I had everything they needed," he said. "I just didn't know." The afternoon the final paperwork on Sandra's case was signed, Harriet opened a bottle of cider she had been keeping in her office for an appropriate occasion and poured 5 small glasses for herself, Sandra, Deacon, Frank, and June, who had driven back from Grants Pass for the signing. They drank them standing up in the cluttered office above the hardware store, and nobody gave a speech. Sandra stood beside the window. She was looking at the street below with an expression that had some distance in it, the kind of distance that comes from looking at a thing that used to be terrifying from the far side of it. Colt was sitting beside her, close enough that his shoulder pressed against her left knee, and she rested her hand on his head without looking down. That was when Deacon knew. He had been watching it for 3 weeks without naming it. The way she stayed. The way she had come back to help Harold with something he hadn't asked her help with. The way she had sat across the table from Alicia and told the truth without flinching. The way she had started to learn the names of people in this town, what they liked, what they needed, how they operated. The way Millhaven had started, slowly, to hold her. She was not passing through anymore. He was not entirely sure he was either. He drove her to Harold and May Tillman's house that evening. Harold had insisted, and insisting was a mode Harold had in him that was better not resisted. May had made soup from scratch, which the doctors had told her she was probably not supposed to do for at least another 3 months, which she had concluded was approximately 3 months of very conservative advice, and the kitchen smelled like onion and thyme and warm bread and the specific warmth of a house where something was being repaired that had nothing to do with the walls. They ate at the kitchen table, the 4 of them, and Colt was under the table against Deacon's boot, and occasionally received a small piece of bread crust from May's direction that both Deacon and May pretended they did not see. Harold talked about the contracting business he had sold 12 years ago and the jobs he most remembered, which were not the biggest ones, but the ones where someone had trusted him with something they cared about. Sandra talked about the desert and the convoys and the hours you spent in a cab, waiting for something to happen, that you hoped would not happen, but that you had to be ready for. May, whose speech had come back slower than her cognition, watched each of them with her steady light eyes and said less than the others, but missed nothing. At the end of the evening, when the dishes were done, and they were standing in Harold's narrow front hallway, May took Sandra's hand in both of hers and held it for a moment and looked up at her. "You're staying," she said. It was not a question. Sandra looked at her. Something in her face went quiet in the way that things go quiet after a long season of not being quiet. "I think so," she said. May nodded, satisfied, and let go of her hand. Outside, in the cold February air, Deacon and Sandra stood beside the truck. Colt sat in the back, visible through the window, ears up. "You have a plan?" Deacon asked. "Harriet offered me part-time work at the office," Sandra said. "Housing advocacy. Said I know the process now from the inside out." A small, dry sound that was not quite a laugh. "She said that's worth something." "It is." She looked at him. "What about you?" He looked down the empty road at the street lamps making yellow pools on the pavement. He had been a man in motion for a year and a half. Motion had suited him because it required nothing except forward. And forward at least had the virtue of not being where you were. He thought about Harold handing him the pry bar without explanation. About Dolores bringing coffee before he sat down. About Harriet's board of pushpins and the particular refusal it represented. About Colt sitting down next to a woman in a bus station with a tattoo on her arm, because Colt trusted his own read of people, and Deacon had learned over 6 years to trust Colts. "There's a housing property on Clement Street," he said, "between tenants. Harriet mentioned it needs some structural work before it goes back on the market. Foundation drainage, framing around the back entry." He paused. "I can do that." Sandra looked at him with the careful eyes of a woman who had done her own risk assessment in places where getting it wrong was fatal. "Foundation drainage could take a while," she said. "It could," he agreed. She put her hands in her coat pockets and looked at the street and then at the truck where Colt was watching them with his ears forward. "Okay," she said. He drove back to the motel. He sat for a while in the parking lot with the engine off and the cold coming in and Colt's chin resting on the back of the seat beside his shoulder. For the first time in 18 months, Deacon did not think about where he was going next. He thought about the property on Clement Street and what it would take to fix the drainage, and whether Harriet would know a good supply yard, and whether the Tillmans would want company for dinner again sometime, and whether the diner had the same cook on Fridays as on Wednesdays because the Thursday eggs had been better. He reached back and rested his hand on Colt's head, and Colt pushed against it. "Good call," he said. Back at the station, Colt exhaled slowly and settled. Outside Millhaven was dark and cold and February quiet, and the street lamps made their yellow circles on the pavement, and somewhere down the block a porch light was on. There are people in this world who have spent too long carrying things alone, not because they're weak, because they were trained to handle it, and so they do, and they keep doing it, and somewhere along the way they forget that handling it alone was the necessity, not the goal. And sometimes the thing that breaks through that is not a dramatic event or a grand gesture. Sometimes it is a dog. Sometimes it is a tattoo. Sometimes it is an old man handing you a pry bar and trusting you to know what to do with it. If you have someone in your life who is carrying things the way Sandra carried them, or the way Deacon carried them, I hope you are the thing that breaks through. I hope you show up without being asked. I hope you sit down beside them. And if you are the one carrying, I hope something finds you that my dog would sit still for. May God bless you and keep your family close and bring you home to the place where your rest is.